The whole affair began with a simple smile, a resonant sermon, and a grand promise to purify the town's very soul. But nobody could have anticipated that this pledge would necessitate the demolition of the sole sacred edifice the community had ever known. Tucked away amidst undulating countryside and seemingly endless fields of maize in the heart of southern Louisiana lies a modest hamlet called Saint. Allah. It's a place that eludes most cartographic representations. No major thoroughfares venture in its direction, only rustic lanes, welcoming front verandas, and neighbors who still acknowledge each other with a friendly wave each dawn. Life in St. Elora unfolded at a leisurely pace. Some characterized it as serene, others as arduous. Yet, on one point, a universal consensus prevailed. The very essence of the town resided within the venerable church gracing Main Street. St. Mary's Catholic Church had stood sentinel for over a century. Its weathered crimson brick facade had weathered numerous tempests and heartaches, witnessed countless births and solemn burials. Every Sunday, its resonant bells cascaded across the farmlands, beckoning farmers, educators, mechanics, and grieving widows alike. It was more than merely a place of worship. It was a repository of cherished memories, a symbol of collective belonging. Even those who seldom attended services would offer a respectful nod as they passed by. Some would lay floral tributes at its threshold on Mother's Day. Others would kindle votive lights within its hallowed walls in remembrance of departed loved ones whose names they rarely uttered aloud. In St. Elora, faith was a quiet force, not a boisterous declaration. It was a gentle current that flowed through generations. Then came the electoral season. Calvin Brooks. His name adorned every lawn sign, resonated through every radio advertisement, and graced every newspaper's front page. A charismatic preacher who had transitioned into politics, Calvin had recently arrived in town, established his own place of worship, and swiftly captured the allegiance of a significant portion of the populace with his impassioned sermons and even grander pronouncements. He spoke with an ardent fervor, a profound conviction, and a palpable sense of purpose that became apparent only upon closer listening. He proclaimed, "There is but one truth, and it is not to be found in effigies or in structures erected by idolaters." Some applauded his words, while others winced. Still others, particularly the elder residents, those who had been baptized in the sacred waters behind St. Mary's, exchanged vows beneath its wooden cross and interred their kin beneath its ancient oak, chose a dignified silence, not in agreement but from a painful awareness of the devastation wrought when spiritual devotion devolved into a battleground. Throughout the campaign, Calvin seldom uttered the name Saint Mary's, but his disdain for it was unmistakably clear to many. He advocated for spiritual reform, for the eradication of what he termed false traditions. He preached a message of renewal. He called for unity, yet his pronouncements carried an insidious undertone of discord, and against all odds, he triumphed. He didn't merely win. He achieved a resounding victory. By springtime, Calvin Brooks had ascended to the esteemed position of mayor of St. Allah. For a period, an unnerving quiet settled over the town, an oppressive stillness. No sweeping changes were implemented, no bold speeches were delivered, only mundane town council meetings, ceremonial ribbon-cutting events, and an abundance of polite smiles. However, beneath this placid exterior, a subtle yet significant shift had occurred. During Sunday services, hushed conversations became prevalent. Attendance at St. Mary's saw a notable increase. Some attributed this resurgence to apprehension, while others cited loyalty. A prevailing sentiment suggested it was a combination of both. Then, one day, an unexpected development unfolded. The town's official online portal featured an announcement. A new revitalization initiative was slated for the heart of downtown St. Elora. On its surface, the proposal appeared innocuous. enhancements to public seating, modern illumination systems, and a regional hub dedicated to spiritual enlightenment. Yet, a careful examination of the architectural schematics, discreetly nestled amongst the contemporary glass and steel designs, revealed the conspicuous absence of St. Mary's. There was no mention of its relocation, no provision for a commemorative monument. It had simply been erased. It was at this juncture that genuine, fervent prayers began to ascend. Do you desire the complete chronicle of what transpired thereafter? How a community rallied against entrenched power, and how a solitary miracle irrevocably altered destiny? Continue to observe. The true turning point has yet to manifest. Initially, the majority of the townsfolk interpreted the mayor's silence as a testament to his reverence. Calvin Brooks had remained conspicuously reticent concerning St. Mary's since assuming office. He had presided over the inauguration of the new farmers' market, bestowed academic awards at the local high school, and even stood proudly alongside local servicemen during Memorial Day commemorations. To a casual observer, he projected the image of an exemplary small-town leader. However, those who possessed the discernment to listen closely, to truly attune themselves to the undercurrents, could perceive a profound disquiet brewing beneath the veneer of tranquility. The initial fissures in this facade became evident during a Thursday service held at his own place of worship, the New Light Chapel. Clad in a meticulously tailored charcoal suit, he stood at the pulpit, his voice a smooth yet pointed instrument of rhetoric. "The Lord declared," he preached, "Thou shalt have no other gods before me." Yet some among us prostrate themselves before idols, kindle flames for effigies fashioned from clay, and erroneously label this as devotion. That, my friends, is not faith. It is outright idolatry. He never explicitly named St. Mary's, rendering such a declaration superfluous. Every resident of St. Allah was acutely aware of his veiled accusation. The news disseminated with astonishing rapidity. The following day, the local cafe on Main Street buzzed with hushed dialogues and incredulous glances. Mrs. Redmond, a woman who had not attended Mass in 5 years, entered St. Mary's and reverently lit a candle. A farmer named Troy began to frequent the Sunday services, his work boots still bearing the mud of his fields. Gradually, the pews of the church began to fill once more, not as an act of overt protest, but from a deeper, more ancient impulse: preservation. They were not merely defending a structure of brick and mortar. They were safeguarding cherished memories, familial legacies, and time-honored traditions. Yet, Calvin's campaign of spiritual redefinition was far from over. A fortnight later, he unveiled the inaugural phase of the Spiritual Renewal Initiative. The town council, overwhelmingly composed of his staunch supporters, readily assented to his proposals as he presented a series of slides. The vision encompassed modern architectural aesthetics, expansive public spaces, and versatile communal auditoriums, conspicuously devoid of any reference to St. Mary's. He articulated his vision with eloquent persuasion, advocating for the shedding of archaic symbols and the embrace of a faith that resided within the heart, rather than within physical confines. A smattering of applause followed, while others remained impassive, their gazes fixed and intent. Reverend Calvin harbored an ambition that extended beyond mere urban modernization. He sought to fundamentally alter the very definition of sanctity. Subsequently, the clandestine revelations began to surface. An anonymous electronic message circulated clandestinely throughout the town, forwarded from one inbox to another, discussed in intimate family gatherings, and debated at parent-teacher association meetings. This message exposed a crucial document, an internal construction memorandum that indicated the contracts for the new spiritual center had been finalized months prior to the conclusion of the mayoral election. The construction firm in question was notably owned by Calvin's brother-in-law. A handful of courageous citizens deemed it imperative to bring this matter to the attention of the local newspaper. The front-page headline blared, "Faith and Favoritism. Is the mayor's church behind the town's redevelopment? Calvin's response was swift and calculated, disseminated through a carefully crafted video address. He vehemently denounced the allegations as unsubstantiated assaults propagated by individuals clinging to the past. He insisted that the project was solely dedicated to fostering unity within the town under a singular vision of spiritual advancement. However, the damage had already been inflicted. The populace no longer perceived him as a spiritual leader. They viewed him as an individual driven by a singular objective: to systematically efface a vital component of their collective identity. The schism within the community deepened. During Sunday Masses, Father Thomas maintained a tone of gentle counsel, consistently focusing his sermons on themes of hope and resilience. Nevertheless, his parishioners could discern a profound sorrow lingering in his eyes. Following one service, a young girl posed a poignant question: "Will Jesus be sad if someone demolishes his house?" Father Thomas found himself momentarily speechless. Concurrently, certain ardent proponents of Calvin's agenda became increasingly vocal and aggressive. They decried St. Mary's as an anachronistic relic, a detrimental impediment to progress. Online forums ignited with acrimonious debates. Lawn signs were pilfered, and the church's mailbox became the target of defacement with paint. Despite this escalating hostility, the bells of St. Mary's continued their faithful tolling every Sunday. The candles within its sanctuary remained perpetually alight. For within St. Laura, faith did not manifest as a strident cry. It exhibited an unwavering resilience. And within that steadfast endurance, an invisible yet unyielding boundary had been established. The devoted members of St. Mary's were no longer merely safeguarding a physical edifice. They were preparing for an unforeseen conflict against a mayor who harbored the conviction that he could redefine spirituality through the cold materiality of concrete and steel. Yet, some aspects of existence, some truths, are far too sacred to be carelessly paved over. The impending action was not heralded by a formal communiqué, nor was it preceded by a town hall deliberation, a public press conference, or a community forum. Instead, it materialized as an unassuming addition to the town's official digital platform. A solitary sentence embedded within a glossy PDF document designated as Downtown Revitalization Phase 2. Most individuals would likely have overlooked it. Many would not have even bothered to download it. However, one person did. That individual was Linda Carrington, a retired librarian possessing an exceptionally keen intellect and an even sharper memory. She had meticulously documented and categorized every civic plan, every map, and every official pronouncement the town had published over the preceding 3 decades. Her diligence was not born of idle curiosity, but rather from a profound sense of vigilance. As she perused the PDF over her morning coffee, her hand, mid-sip, froze. The map depicted the proposed new layout of the downtown district, featuring enhanced bicycle lanes, a reconfigured farmers market, contemporary seating arrangements, and a sprawling complex dedicated to spiritual rejuvenation, complete with a glass-domed auditorium, a contemplative garden, and a technologically advanced chapel. And in the very location where St. Mary's Church had stood for generations, there was a stark, unadorned gray rectangle labeled Cleared Site. Linda maintained her composure, refraining from immediate comment. She printed the document, drove directly to the church, and, with hands trembling, presented it to Father Thomas. He needed only to scan a short distance into its contents. The stark designation of Cleared Site conveyed the entirety of the grim message. By sunset, the news had propagated with a speed that outpaced even the swiftest wildfire in parched brush. Residents began communicating through text messages. Printed copies of the document began appearing on the corkboard outside the local diner. A few intrepid teenagers took it upon themselves to plaster the town square with hastily handwritten signs proclaiming, "They are demolishing St. Mary's. This is not a revival. It is an act of erasure." And in that moment, the long-held silence was irrevocably shattered. Father Thomas addressed his congregation following Mass that Sunday. His voice, typically characterized by its calm and measured cadence, betrayed a slight tremor at the edges. "They assert that progress necessitates sacrifice," he stated, holding aloft the incriminating blueprint. "But faith is not an impediment to be removed. It is the very foundation upon which we must build." A woman in the back pew wept softly. An elderly gentleman clenched his jaw, his hand instinctively making the sign of the cross. Behind closed doors, town officials attempted to spin the narrative. A designated spokesperson claimed the church was structurally unsound and that a relocation had been under consideration, a claim vehemently denied by any representative of St. Mary's. Subsequently, photographic evidence emerged. A construction worker, requesting anonymity, provided images depicting machinery being transported to a warehouse located a mere 2 blocks from the church. Bulldozers, jackhammers, and surveyor flags had already been discreetly positioned around the church grounds, their minuscule orange ribbons fluttering in the breeze like unsolicited warnings. During that same week, municipal maintenance vehicles appeared in the vicinity of the church, ostensibly to inspect underground utilities. However, long-standing residents were acutely aware that such inspections had never occurred without prior notification, nor had such elaborate equipment ever been deployed for routine checks. The entire operation was unfolding with clandestine precision, methodical execution, and deliberate intent. It was then that local reporter Jonah Reese, delving into the background of the construction company contracted for the project, unearthed a truth that uncoiled with the silent menace of a serpent from tall grass. The primary contractor was Brookstone Developments, a private entity headquartered in a neighboring county. Its executive board included Ethan Malloy, none other than Calvin Brooks's brother-in-law. This was not merely a matter of spiritual reform or urban regeneration. It was an overt instance of avarice cloaked in religious rhetoric and peddled as spiritual salvation. The town council, now entirely beholden to Calvin's influence, steadfastly refused to issue any statements. Petitions were summarily disregarded. Electronic correspondence was met with automated, dismissive replies. The few officials who had once harbored sympathies for the church now studiously avoided public eye contact. Yet, a peculiar shift began to manifest within St. Alora. It was not an eruption of overt outrage or widespread rioting, but rather a deep-seated, unwavering conviction. Individuals started arriving at St. Mary's on weekdays, not solely on Sundays. They diligently cleaned the pews, meticulously repainted the fence, and lovingly planted rose bushes adjacent to the vestibule. A young boy left his baseball glove at the altar, accompanied by a poignant note that read, "Please don't take my church." The edifice had never been mere wood and stone. It represented memory, a sanctuary. And now, it had become a definitive line in the sand. While the mayor may have drafted his plans in ink, the inhabitants of Sonora were steadfastly preparing to articulate their dissent through fervent prayer. And prayers, unlike official permits, require no authorization. The ensuing demonstrations eschewed the cacophony of bullhorns and the rhythm of marching chants. There were no shattered windows, no barricades obstructing traffic, only a profound silence, flickering candles, and unwavering prayer. It commenced with a single individual, Mrs. Evelyn Morales, a woman of 84 years, born and baptized within the hallowed walls of St. Mary's, renowned throughout the town for her delectable peach cobbler and the rosary beads that never seemed to leave her fingers. On a Thursday afternoon, amidst swirling rumors and the ominous circling of surveyor vehicles like predatory vultures, Evelyn arrived alone. She traversed the gravel pathway with deliberate slowness, positioned a folding chair precisely at the base of the front steps, and settled down, her rosary beads clutched in her hand. Then she began to pray, her voice soft yet clearly audible. She did not present the outward appearance of a protester, yet she unequivocally became one. By the time dusk descended, 4 more chairs had been placed beside hers. By midnight, an array of blankets, thermoses filled with steaming coffee, and even a portable heater borrowed from the local fire station had appeared. Someone contributed folding tables, while others brought provisions for sustenance, and every single participant brought forth their faith. They christened this endeavor the Night Watch. There were no banners, no slogans, only the ethereal sound of whispered Hail Marys echoing beneath the vast expanse of the starlit sky. The news of this silent vigil spread with remarkable swiftness. Local journalists arrived, cameras in tow, but were met with courteous nods and polite refusals to be interviewed. "We are not here to speak," one woman stated resolutely. "We are here to listen to the only voice that truly matters at this moment." By Saturday, a contingent exceeding 70 individuals had joined the vigil. Some committed to remaining throughout the night, while others arrived before the break of dawn to relieve those departing for a brief respite. Entire families took turns participating. A 12-year-old boy named Luke brought his guitar and began to softly serenade the dawn with a hymn. Across the street, a few men affiliated with the mayor's congregation observed the scene from their pickup trucks, remaining conspicuously silent. Even those who had not set foot inside St. Mary's for years began to arrive, their presence marked by quiet reverence and humble supplication, pausing only to kneel momentarily. Construction workers, mechanics, high school students adorned in their varsity jackets, and a single father carrying his sleeping toddler on his shoulder all joined the growing assembly. A profound transformation was unfolding, not in its volume, but in its depth. Within the sanctuary of the church, Father Thomas maintained the doors open from the earliest hours of the morning until the stroke of midnight. The candles upon the altar were never permitted to extinguish. He eschewed fiery oratory and the organization of large-scale rallies. Instead, he moved among his devoted flock, offering blessings, dispensing tissues, and conveying occasional smiles of encouragement. On Sunday morning, the church bells resonated with a fervor unmatched in recent memory. On that particular day, the pews were filled to capacity well before the initial strains of the organ filled the air. The church's interior was insufficient to accommodate the throng, compelling dozens to stand outside in the chilly air, listening intently through the open windows. As Father Thomas elevated the Eucharist, a hushed whisper emanated from the crowd. "This is what we are fighting for." Yet, in truth, no one was engaged in physical combat, neither with clenched fists nor with furious intent. Instead of overt confrontation, the resistance manifested in the form of bended knees upon the cold pavement and hands clasped in earnest supplication. It was expressed through the gentle flicker of candles housed within mason jars and the heartfelt messages inscribed with chalk upon the sidewalks. "Lord, protect this house. Do not permit them to tear her down." Local businesses began to lend their quiet support to the vigil. The proprietor of a popular bakery generously donated fresh bagels each morning. A local florist delivered a beautiful arrangement of lilies to the base of the statue of the Virgin Mary. One mechanic offered his services, pledging to repair any vehicle free of charge for individuals participating in a prayer shift. Some of the mayor's close allies attempted to diminish the significance of these events through social media commentary. "It's merely a collection of nostalgic elderly Catholics," they posted disparagingly. However, deep within the heart of the town, a different understanding prevailed. This was not a matter of mere nostalgia. It was the vibrant memory of a community refusing to be irrevocably erased. Each night, the vigil grew in stature, not in clamor, but in its profound significance. It evolved into the very heartbeat of the town. By the second week, Jasmine Rowe, a mother who had tragically lost her teenage daughter years prior and had not set foot in a church since, approached the steps, a single candle illuminating her path. She softly whispered her daughter's name, knelt beside Mrs. Evelyn, and joined in the collective prayer. No one dictated her words, nor did anyone inquire about the reasons for her presence. She simply belonged. A representative from the mayor's office drove past one evening, shaking his head in disbelief. "They will eventually grow weary," he muttered dismissively. However, their resolve did not waver. For grief does not succumb to fatigue, hope does not become depleted, and faith is not measured by its audible resonance. It is, rather, quantified by its unwavering stillness, and in that profound stillness, the town of Saint. Alora had made a resolute decision. If they intended to demolish the church, they would have to do so while traversing a path paved with heartfelt prayer. And such an undertaking is not without its profound difficulties, especially when the divine is observing. It was the third week of the vigil. By this juncture, the steps of Saint Mary's had transformed into a second home for scores of devoted individuals. Sleeping bags were arranged along the side wall, and lanterns cast a soft, halo-like glow. Even the ancient oak tree standing sentinel by the main gate appeared to hold itself with greater dignity, as if it too were vigilantly watching over the faithful congregation. On that particular Wednesday night, the temperature had plummeted to below 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Only a handful of resolute souls remained for the overnight shift, precisely 7 individuals. They were swaddled in thick blankets and heavy parkas, sipping lukewarm coffee and offering prayers in hushed murmurs. Among them was James Howard, a former Marine whose knees ached persistently, clutching a worn rosary that had once belonged to his grandmother. He sat on an overturned milk crate, his eyes closed, his head bowed in contemplation. Beside him, Sister Bernarde, a retired nun in her 70s, initiated the final decade of the rosary. "Holy Mary, Mother of God," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the whispering wind. The others echoed her refrain, their cadence slow and steady, reminiscent of a resilient heartbeat in the biting cold. And then it happened. Precisely at 2:17 a.m., every single candle adorning the steps was simultaneously extinguished. There was no discernible wind, no errant breeze, only an encompassing darkness. The sudden silence was so acute it seemed to pierce through one's very bones. James was the first to lift his gaze. "Sister," he inquired, his voice laced with a tremor of unease. "I did not extinguish it," she replied, her grip tightening on the fabric of her coat. A woman produced a lighter. It clicked ineffectually. Nothing. Another attempted to activate her phone's flashlight. The battery was depleted. A third held a match aloft. It sparked brilliantly, then died within her fingers. It was at this precise moment that they perceived it, the unmistakable sound of hinges, old and groaning, moving slowly, deliberately. All heads swiveled in unison toward the church doors. Now, these very doors had been secured with chains and heavy padlocks by the town council since the official construction order had been posted. No one had been granted access for over 2 weeks. Yet now, bathed in the faint, ethereal glow of the solitary street lamp, they witnessed an astonishing sight. The left door was gradually creaking open, inch by painstaking inch, as if gently propelled from within. No one moved. No one uttered a sound. And then, driven by an instinctive impulse, or perhaps by a divine tug, Sister Bernadette dropped to her knees. Her voice, trembling with emotion, broke the profound silence. "If it is you, Mother of Mercy, be with us this night. Protect this house." A gentle wind arose, not cold or biting, but warm, caressing their skin like a benevolent breath. The very atmosphere seemed to shift, growing heavier, more dense. It was not a sensation of fear that pervaded, but rather a palpable feeling of presence, as if an unseen entity had just materialized within the room. From across the street, a dog began to howl mournfully. Birds stirred restlessly in the branches of the tree overhead. And within the shadowed embrace of the church doorway, something began to shimmer, not taking on a distinct shape or figure, but rather emanating a pure light, as if the moon itself had descended and settled within the building. They remained outside until the first rays of dawn pierced the horizon. No one dared to step inside. No one dared to close the enigmatic portal. When the sun finally ascended and Father Thomas arrived for the customary morning prayer, The 7 vigil keepers remained in their positions, their eyes wide with wonder, their hearts pounding with a mixture of awe and trepidation, their hands clasped tightly together. The priest ascended the steps, his gaze fixed upon the open doorway, and paused. "Who opened this?" he inquired, his voice tinged with bewilderment. None of them offered a response. What transpired next was even more extraordinary. Within the hallowed interior of the church, at the very foot of the altar, the floor was carpeted with an abundance of fresh red roses, not mere petals, but fully bloomed blossoms, meticulously arranged almost symmetrically in countless rows. There had been no flowers present in that location the previous evening. The church had been securely locked, and no one possessed any keys. Furthermore, no florist had been observed near the property for several days. Father Thomas stood in a state of stunned silence. He reached down, gently plucked a single bloom, and held it to his nose. It was still dewy, its fragrance remarkably potent, its petals still retaining a comforting warmth, as if it had been freshly plucked moments before. He then raised his gaze to the altar, where the revered statue of the Virgin Mary stood, her eyes cast downward in an expression of serene mercy. A slender beam of sunlight, filtering through a fractured stained glass window, landed directly upon her visage. No one dared to speak. By noon, the remarkable occurrences had become the sole topic of conversation throughout the town. "They say the church opened itself," whispered the townsfolk. "There were roses, as if for a wedding feast." A light appeared from nowhere. Rumors and whispers circulated from porch to porch, and from one shop to another. Some dismissed these accounts outright, while others attempted to rationalize them with logical explanations. However, for those 7 individuals who had faithfully kept vigil through the night, there remained no shadow of a doubt. Something inexplicable had entered the church, something unseen yet profoundly felt, something that conveyed a clear message. This house does not belong to you to destroy. That evening, an astonishing assembly of over 200 people gathered for the vigil, and each and every one of them arrived bearing a rose. For 2 full days following the extraordinary Night of the Roses, the doors of St. Mary's remained ajar. No one dared to close them. The entire town seemed to be enveloped in a palpable shift in atmosphere. It was not louder, nor was it more bustling, but rather it felt heavier, as if the very air were holding its breath in anticipation. Individuals traversed past St. Mary's with a more deliberate, unhurried gait. Children no longer ran boisterously on the sidewalks as they had in the past. Even the mayor's office refrained from posting any official updates. And then, on the 3rd night, he arrived. There was no procession, no media circus, no entourage, just a solitary black sedan gliding to a halt beneath a solitary street lamp outside the church. Mayor Calvin Brooks emerged, clad in a dark overcoat, sans tie, and notably without an umbrella, despite the skies hinting at precipitation. He surveyed the scene, not the expectant throng, for none were present. Only a scattered few faithful congregated across the thoroughfare, maintaining a distant, solemn vigil. They saw him, yet no one called out, no one stirred. He proceeded across the street, alone. One of the onlookers softly murmured, "He has finally arrived to witness it firsthand." However, not everyone was convinced his purpose was prayer. Inside the hallowed halls, the sanctuary was nearly deserted. A single figure sat in quiet contemplation near the side altar. Angela Rowe, the church's devoted caretaker of many years. She had been engaged in dusting the pews when the creak of the entrance reverberated once more. But this time, it was not an act of divine intervention, it was a man. She discreetly retreated into the side chapel, observing from the concealing shadows. The mayor uttered no words, cast no glances around. He simply advanced, his pace measured and deliberate, stopping at the base of the main altar, his gaze fixed intently upon the effigy of the Virgin Mary. For an extended period, silence reigned. Angela could discern the tightening of his jaw, the clenching of his fist. Then abruptly, he shattered the quiet. "Why?" he demanded, his voice low yet piercing. "Why do they hold you in such high regard? You are merely a sculpted form, a fabrication born from Rome, and yet they prostrate themselves. They weep, they surrender all they possess to you." He took a step closer, as if daring the statue to respond. "If there is a divine entity behind that stone visage, then reveal yourself. For I am weary of pretense, weary of constructing edifices to which I give no credence, weary of uttering pronouncements devoid of sincerity." He struck the altar's base with his hand, the impact echoing like a gunshot through the hushed chapel. And then it occurred. A gentle current of air wafted through the sanctuary, though the windows remained sealed and the night outside was utterly still. Angela, frozen behind the column, felt it too, a warmth that emanated not from any heating system or artificial light, but akin to a tender presence brushing against her cheek. Before either of them could fully react, the statue of the Virgin Mary began to emanate a soft, internal luminescence. It was not a blinding theatrical display, but a gentle radiance pulsing from within her eyes, her face, her hands. Calvin recoiled instinctively, raising an arm to shield his face. His mouth opened, but no sound escaped. Angela witnessed it with absolute clarity. The Virgin's eyes were open, not wide, but just a fraction, enough to be undeniably perceptible, enough to make a grown man tremble. He sank to his knees. Initially, there were no tears, only ragged, uneven breaths. He buried his face in his hands, remaining thus for several minutes. Then, slowly he rose, not fully, but enough to crawl closer, his hand reaching out to touch the feet of the statue. A voice, soft and unmistakably feminine, whispered through the air, "Do not presume to touch what is sacred. This sanctuary is not yours to command." Angela did not perceive the words with her ears, but felt them resonate within her very being, her soul. And from the way Calvin froze, it was evident he had experienced the same. He spoke no further. He did not look about. He simply rose, wiped his face, and departed the church as he had arrived, alone. Angela waited until the door had closed. Then she sank onto the nearest pew, her heart hammering, her rosary clasped so tightly it left an impression on her palm. The following morning, she confided in no one, at least not initially. She required time to process what she had witnessed, what he had witnessed, but she felt it in her core. He had come to challenge the divine, and instead, he had been transformed by it. Outside the church, the crowd continued their vigil. They were unaware of the events transpiling within. Not yet, but they would learn. For something fundamental had shifted. And when he reappeared, his eyes red-rimmed, his face pale, his hands empty, they understood that the confrontation had concluded and the heavenly realm had prevailed. For 3 days, he remained utterly silent. No press conferences, no emails, no pronouncements from his pulpit at the New Light Chapel, not even a brief statement across his meticulously curated social media platforms. Mayor Calvin Brooks had simply vanished from public view. Some speculated he had left town, others suggested illness. But those who had been present that fateful night, those who had observed his departure from St. Mary's, his eyes swollen and hands quivering, knew the truth. He had not disappeared. He was engaged in a profound internal struggle, grappling with forces far beyond his personal dominion. The machinery intended for the construction site stood dormant outside the church. Tractors lay shrouded beneath tarpaulins, and traffic cones gathered dust. The placards that had once proclaimed future site of the Spiritual Renewal Center were quietly removed by municipal workers without any official explanation. Although no formal announcement was made, everyone sensed the shift. The ambitious project was no longer moving forward. Father Thomas offered no commentary, merely a faint smile each morning as he opened the doors as usual and lit the candles at the altar. Angela, the silent witness to that miraculous night, kept her profound experience to herself. Yet, a transformation had also occurred within her. Her gait became more measured, her prayers more fervent, her gaze more keenly observant. Then, on a particular foggy Sunday morning, he returned, not amidst a fanfare of sirens, nor through a discreet rear entrance. He ascended the main steps of St. Mary's, indistinguishable from any other worshipper. He wore no suit, was accompanied by no security detail, and delivered no impassioned speech. His attire was a simple jacket, his only possessions a well-worn leather-bound Bible, and, in his right hand, a rosary. His presence did not go unnoticed, of course. Some stared in sheer astonishment, others averted their gaze, uncertain how to react. But Father Thomas offered a gentle nod and stepped aside, allowing Calvin to enter the sanctuary. He occupied a solitary pew at the back, quiet, his head bowed. He made no request to speak, demanded no special attention. He simply listened. When the service concluded, he did not hasten to depart. He waited until the church had emptied, then slowly made his way towards the statue of the Virgin Mary. A few individuals remained, observing from a respectful distance. Not a word was spoken. He placed a single red rose at her feet. That was all, yet it was profoundly significant. That afternoon, hushed rumors began to circulate. He had undergone a change. He had seen something. He had felt something, and although Calvin never offered a complete account of the events that transpired within the church that night, his subsequent actions spoke volumes. He rescinded funding for the renewal project. He convened an emergency council meeting and quietly invalidated the construction permits. His brother-in-law, the contractor, was removed from the town's approved vendor registry. When reporters sought his comment, Calvin's sole utterance was, "Some places are not ours to claim. Some places belong to God." That week, the townsfolk perceived him differently. The fiery mayor who had once decried statues as idols and religious processions as mere theater, now walked to his office past the church without hesitation. He offered a friendly wave to Sister Bernadette, assisted Mr. Howard with his groceries, and even made an appearance at a church bake sale, purchasing a lemon pie and remaining for the recitation of the rosary. There was no spotlight, no camera crew, simply his presence. The town did not erupt into cheers or celebrations. Instead, a palpable softening permeated the atmosphere. He had once wielded the authority of a hammer. Now, he was a man willing to kneel, and in that profound humility, something sacred began to take root, not only within him, but within the very fabric of the town. The divisions that had once separated congregations and political factions, churches and municipal councils, started to dissolve. Individuals who had not spoken for months now shared conversation over coffee outside the chapel. For the true miracle was not solely in the luminous statue or the offering of roses. It was in the man who had arrived with the intention of demolishing a place of worship, only to depart, having helped rebuild it. This is what sank. Allah remembered, and this is what endured long after the vigil candles had flickered out. It dawned as a Sunday like any other, or at least that was the outward appearance. Birds chirped above rooftops, blanketed in dew. Children in their finest attire fidgeted with their collars, and the bells of St. Mary's chimed with their customary faithfulness, unwavering and unbroken. Yet, something subtle but distinct permeated the air. Word had spread that morning, quietly but with remarkable speed. The mayor was scheduled to address the town, not through the digital ether, not within his own congregation, but directly in front of the very edifice he had once sought to obliterate. By 8:30 that morning, the steps of St. Mary's were thronged. Mothers cradled infants. Veterans stood with their hands clasped over their hearts. Even the skeptics, those who had not set foot inside a church for years, had come to bear witness. No one wished to miss this momentous occasion. And then he appeared. No security detail, no raised platform, no amplification device, just Mayor Calvin Brooks walking alone across Main Street, a small wooden cross affixed to his lapel and a rosary draped from his right wrist. He moved with deliberate slowness, as if each step bore the immense weight of countless unspoken sentiments. He paused at the base of the steps, drew a deep breath, and then surveyed the assembled crowd. His voice, when it came, did not boom. It did not need to. "I came here once with the intention of taking something away," he began. "Today, I come to offer something in return." There was no applause, only a profound silence, holy, respectful, and weighty. "I believed I understood faith," he continued, his voice resonating with emotion. "I was convinced I possessed the truth, but I never truly comprehended the meaning of sacred until I found myself kneeling right here, pleading for answers from a deity I claimed to follow, yet never truly heard." A gentle breeze swept across the assembled throng. Some wept softly, others simply nodded, their gazes fixed upon the man who had once been their adversary. "I have faltered," he admitted. "I allowed arrogance to speak louder than prayer. I permitted ambition to drown out humility. I did not merely disregard your voices. I attempted to silence them. I sought to obliterate your cherished memories and supplant them with my own vision of reality." He raised his eyes toward the church behind him, his gaze glistening. "But some things are not within the purview of politicians. Some things belong to the divine." He then reached into his pocket and produced a folded document. Holding it aloft, he declared, "This is the final decree to cease the St. Allah renewal project. Effective immediately, all construction contracts are nullified. The land shall remain undisturbed. And this church," his voice cracked with emotion, "this church shall stand for as long as you choose to preserve it." There was no eruption of cheers, no jubilant shouts, only an audible wave of collective emotion, akin to the collective sigh of relief from a town that had finally exhaled, after holding its breath for months. Then, an unexpected development occurred. Calvin turned, ascended the steps, and placed the document on the threshold of the church doors. He knelt, kissed the edge of the stone, then rose and turned back to face the crowd. From his pocket, he withdrew a small cross necklace and held it high for all to see. "I do not know what the remainder of my path will entail," he stated, his voice thick with emotion. "I do not possess all the answers, but this much I now comprehend." He paused, his voice trembling. "This house belongs to God, not to me, nor to any elected official, and if you will permit me, I wish to dedicate the rest of my term to safeguarding what I once sought to dismantle." Still no applause, but suddenly a soft, shaky voice began to sing Ave Maria. Another voice joined, then 5, then 50. Soon, the town square was filled with hundreds singing in unison, tears streaming down their faces, hands raised not in defiance, but in profound peace. Calvin stood motionless, his eyes closed, as if absorbing every note. And in that moment, St. Allah was more than just a town with a preserved church. It was a town with a mended spirit. Because sometimes, the true miracle occurs when the one who arrived with the intent to desecrate the sacred becomes its devoted protector. The ensuing weeks were marked by a quietude, not of silence, but of a sacred Sunday morning stillness. It was a tranquility where voices were softer, conversations lingered longer at doorways, and smiles held a deeper resonance behind the eyes. St. Mary's stood untouched, unharmed, and more vibrant than ever before. The townsfolk spoke of the miracle less with words and more through the way they carried themselves. A palpable reverence permeated the air, lending a deeper rhythm to the town's collective heartbeat. Father Thomas continued his services as usual, but his sermons now carried a gentler warmth. He spoke not of political intrigue, vengeance, or even triumph. His message centered on transformation, on subtle miracles, on the divine's method of whispering with a clarity that resonates with the soul. One afternoon, a group of high school students collaborated on a mural adorning the brick wall behind the parish garden. It depicted the Virgin Mary with open arms, standing protectively before the church. Beneath it, the inscription read, "She did not stop the demolition. She stopped a heart from hardening." This poignant statement resonated deeply with the community because, in truth, nothing overtly supernatural had occurred in St. Allah. There were no thunderous pronouncements, no celestial voices, no dramatic parting of the heavens. The miracle had not arrived to overwhelm, but to gently soften, not to blind, but to illuminate from within. Calvin Brooks, once the audacious reformer and relentless force against tradition, had become a quiet, unobtrusive presence throughout the town. He no longer sought the limelight or a public platform. He participated in local food drives, meticulously swept leaves from the library's vicinity, and would anonymously occupy a rear pew during every Sunday Mass. No one requested him to speak, no one expected it. His silence conveyed more than any of his previous public addresses ever had. The same man who had once proclaimed that divinity did not reside within buildings now knelt before a statue, not to petition for anything, but simply to be in its proximity. Some believed the miracle was what had transpired within him. Others held that the true miracle was the enduring faith of those who still believed it could happen. But the most profound miracle, it turned out, was the aftermath. A fractured town began to mend. The pews filled not with the clamor of obligation or societal pressure, but with a genuine spiritual hunger. Protestants and Catholics found themselves seated side by side during candlelight vigils. The mayor's former congregation, the New Light Chapel, dispatched volunteers to assist in the restoration of St. Mary's exquisite stained glass windows, and on one particular Tuesday afternoon, Sister Bernadette discovered a bouquet of vibrant red roses placed with gentle care upon the altar. There was no accompanying note, no name inscribed, merely a token of remembrance. The narrative continues to be shared, not for its grandeur, but for its unwavering authenticity. In a world often yearning for the spectacular, Sonora found sustenance in something far more nourishing, a quiet miracle unfolding not in fiery displays, but in the gentle bloom of forgiveness. Ultimately, St. Mary's did more than simply endure. It transcended its physical structure, becoming a powerful symbol of what unfolds when individuals reject the inclination to reciprocate animosity with hostility, choosing instead to kneel and await a divine response. Because the truth is, miracles do not arrive to impress us, they arrive to transform us. And the most significant miracles are not those that halt destructive forces. They are those that reanimate hardened hearts, rewrite unforeseen endings, and leave a town not with shouts, but with song. And when the bells of St. Mary's now ring, they signify more than just the commencement of a service. They herald that grace once visited this place, unannounced, unexpected, and utterly unforgettable. Therefore, if you ever find yourself questioning the efficacy of prayer, or wondering if quiet devotion can indeed shift the immovable, recall this town, remember this church, and reflect upon the man who arrived with the intent to destroy it, only to be remade by the very divine presence he sought to silence. If this narrative has resonated with you, kindly express your appreciation with a like. Share it with someone in need of hope, and subscribe to Touched by Grace for further authentic accounts of faith, redemption, and the quiet miracles that continue to unfold all around us.